On behalf of GW Law's Environmental and Energy Law program, I'm delighted to welcome our audience today, and I want to thank you for tuning in. I'm especially delighted to welcome our guest, GW Law alumna Adrienne Clair. This is the seventh of a series of discussions about careers in energy and environmental law. We will not be having a career panel interview next week. Instead, please tune into our annual Shapiro Symposium on March 18th. The details are on our website. On March 25th, we will be speaking with David Danner, chairman of the Washington State Utilities and Transportation Board. Tapes of these and of past interviews are available on our YouTube channel. From the YouTube search bar, just search for GW Environmental Law and you'll find us. For today's program, if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A box, not into the chat, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. My colleague Perry Ellerts will be posting a link to Adrienne Clair's biography in the chat if you want to dig in a little bit deeper. So, getting down to today's business, it's my pleasure to welcome Adrienne Clair. Adrienne is a partner at Thompson Coburn. She represents clients in electric and natural gas matters and counsels them on compliance and enforcement issues. She serves on the firm's management committee, and she's a past president of the Energy Bar Association. So with that, Adrienne, let's get going.
Sure thing, thank you.
Let's start with just an overview of your practice. Can you tell us a little bit about the kinds of matters you handle?
Sure, and thank you very much, Donna, for inviting me. Of course, you've been a mentor and friend of mine for countless numbers of years, and it's great to see you and sort of be back with my GW Law community. So my practice is one predominantly before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I do also do some state level utility work, and I'm happy to give a bit more detail about that as we go along. But in terms of industries, I handle both electric and natural gas pipeline matters, and that is soup to nuts, some litigation, some settlement proceedings, appellate proceedings that we'll get into in a little bit. One thing that's unique about my practice is that I typically represent what I'll call the load side of the equation. So there are, the companies who serve customers, and then the load are customers who take service. Most of my clients are municipal or cooperatively owned utilities. And what that means, sort of in a nutshell, is they are owned, co-ops are owned by the people who they serve, and they're not for-profit entities. And we could delve into the tax laws, and that would take up the entire 20 minutes. And then municipals are typically functions or parts of a city or state or municipal government. And so most of my clients are municipal or cooperatively held utilities, which is a contrast, for example, against investor-owned utilities, which most of us, you think of your local utility, those are typically investor-owned utilities.
Yeah, but your types of clients, the co-ops and munis, actually serve a pretty substantial amount of the load in this country. As I recall, it's probably between the two of them close to about 20% or so, maybe a bit more.
Thank you, Donna.
Very important.
There is a the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, which is the trade association or the organization for co-ops, and then the American Public Power Association, which is the corollary for that for municipals. Both would be pleased to hear that you knew those statistics about us. They take up more parts of the country than most realize. But when you think of utilities, most people sort of think through stakeholders and shareholders and those sorts of things, which is what most of our clients do not have in the traditional respect.
True. And they're nonprofit and they're very close to the people. So it's really a very different segment. And that's really the reason I want to have you on this program, because I do think that's a part of the utility industry that most people don't even realize exists out there. It actually covers more of the land mass of the US than the electric utilities do, the corporately owned ones. I'm sorry. So let's get back to that litigation point. You did talk a little bit about the fact that you do litigation. Let's talk about what kinds of litigation you do, because I think this is sometimes a bit of a surprise to folks when they think, oh, energy regulatory, what's that got to do with litigation?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I would say, I'm going to give some loose percentages here. I'd say 80 to 90% of my practice is before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and the other varying 10 to 20% is before state public utility commissions. What that typically means is FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, regulates rates, terms, and conditions for sales at wholesale, and the states have jurisdiction over retail transactions. And what FERC in its rate setting capacity, both on the natural gas side under Natural Gas Act and for electric utilities under the Federal Power Act, FERC sets the rates, terms, and conditions for jurisdictional services. And what that means is when a utility makes a filing under the Federal Power Act to change or have an initial rate schedule, FERC may or may not either approve that, but may set that for hearing and settlement discussions, which means we go through longer and longer periods of time trying to reach settlement. And if we don't, then we go into litigated proceedings. And that is litigation like everyone would think of. We do, there's discovery and there's arguments on motions to compel and all those fun sorts of practice, cross-examining witnesses. It's before an administrative law judge. And then the judge renders a decision that goes up to the commission, brief. So everything you would typically expect in sort of civil litigation, it's the same sort of thing we do here, but it's an administrative litigated proceeding.
And then you also then take them up to appellate level.
We do. So it goes, there is a appeal as a matter of right under the Federal Power Act and under the Natural Gas Act to a court of appeals for any of the circuit courts of appeals across the country. So there's the DC circuit here, obviously. We typically, most of my appellate work is before the US Court of Appeals for the DC circuit. We sometimes bring the appeal in the state where we think that the court might be more sympathetic. And so the Third Circuit, if it's a case that deals with a utility in New Jersey, we might file in the Third Circuit, hoping that the court will be more sympathetic. But that is one of the things I think people who aren't in the energy field, and particularly those who don't know regulatory work, think, oh, well, you're never before the Court of Appeals. And we are. We have arguments before the courts of appeals. I wouldn't say all the time, but regularly enough. And so the way that it works at FERC, as with most administrative agencies, you have to first file a protest, raise your grievances with the commission, with the regulatory agency. If you lose, you can file for rehearing, and rehearing is a precondition to then seeking an appeal before a court of appeals. And of course, if you lose there, you can go to the Supreme Court. So yes, I have not had an oral argument for the Supreme Court, but we have had cases, litigated energy cases, of course, as you know, Donna, that go all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yes, that happens fairly frequently. So, hey, your turn's just coming up. It'll be there one of these days.
Thank you. I'll look forward to it.
Tell us a little bit about the skill sets and what it feels like to be in these, you're a first chair in litigation matters.
Yeah, so I will tell
a natural litigator?
I will tell you, not a natural litigator. I was someone who was on the GW Moot Court board because my legal research and writing instructor back in law school said, you should try out for this. And I said, I'm not going to want to do this. I don't want to do oral arguments. This is so not what I want to do. My dad was a lawyer and I thought, oh, I never want to argue with people. I absolutely adore it. So some of the skill sets are what naturally come to mind when you hear litigation, right? So trial advocacy and those sorts of things. You have to be an effective writer. You have to be an effective oral advocate. When it comes to energy work, though, one of the skill sets that I think gets not as much attention as it should before making the decision to do this is the technical piece of it. A lot of what we do is technical. And so it's, and when I say technical, I don't just mean in engineering. That includes accounting. FERC has what's called a uniform system of accounts. And you have to understand those aspects of the practice. There are economists and there's engineers. And so there's a highly technical aspect of doing this work that we rely on our expert consultants enormously for. However, you have to have, I think, both the willingness, the acumen, and the enjoyment of getting into some of these technical matters. And I will say, I was a mass media major who had this dream of being a broadcast journalist. So technical did not come to me naturally or easily, but it is one of the things that I most enjoy because I still, after all these years in practice, I still have days where something comes across my desk, the proverbial desk. Nothing comes across desks these days, but I still have things that come up where I go, I'm not going to be able to get my brain around this one. It's just so intensely technical. And then, on the back end of whatever it is, you think, well, that was awesome because I now understand this new particularly with renewable energy and asynchronous facilities. There's certain things that I grew up not having to understand that now you have to in order to effectively do our jobs, and not just for the regulatory piece, for the transactional piece, or, if you have a client that is, for example, going to build a new facility and needs to finance it, you have to understand some of that technical aspect of the facility or how this all fits together, the generator and the transmission system, or you can't effectively do the job. So that technical part of the skill set is one that I think doesn't get enough attention when we're all deciding whether or not we have the stomach for this.
So are you saying that people have to have a technical background? How does somebody who's, the young student, are they going to know if this works for them or not?
Sure. That's a great question because I did not have a technical background, did not know I needed one. My first job out of law school was at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, clerking for 2 administrative law judges. And I have to, this is going to get to a point I'll make later about networking, but I have to give the shout out that the then Dean of Students, Alfreda Robinson, who everybody at GW Law knows, she is the reason, and I credit her for starting my career. Her husband was a lawyer at FERC, and she introduced the two of us. And he one day in my 3rd year of law school said, "What are you doing when you graduate?" And I said, "I have no idea." And that literally is what started my career. So I credit them for that. But I didn't understand I would have to have a technical background. And it sort of depends on how you go. You can pick this stuff up as you go along. When you're in a law firm, your clients have their own engineers or their accounting group. There are consulting firms. Every case I'm on, there's a consultant with me who helps sort of make sure I don't over lawyer it and screw the whole thing up. And then when I worked at FERC, they had a technical staff. So whenever I had a new issue that my judge needed me to understand, I would go as far as I could to figure it out myself. And then I'd go to the smart guys and say, "Can you please help me figure this out?" And those men and women made sure that I got the technical over time. So no, I would not shy away from, if you're interested in energy law, don't let the technical scare you away. Just know that you're probably going to need to get okay with learning it. And it's doable. I mean, I've done it and I'm thrilled with it.
I think many of us have done it. And so I really, really appreciate you digging into that aspect because I do think you're right. It gets overlooked a lot.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to ask you about, so when I was in private practice, my practice differed quite a bit actually from yours. I had a much stronger transactional piece. And by transactional, I mean that I negotiated contracts. I worked a lot on financings and mergers. I was the regulatory person, meaning I wasn't doing the financing or the merger documents, but I was the person that was writing the representations, making the crafting covenants that would go into those documents. I was the person doing the due diligence to make sure that the companies that we were financing or that were merging had all their regulatory ducks in a row. And then sometimes out of that, maybe you needed to have an approval from FERC or some other sort of regulatory aspect to it. How does that contrast with your practice? Do you see elements of that sort of negotiation, transactional pieces in your practice as well?
Yeah, I do. And I remember your like you said, yours was far more transactional and mystifying to me, quite frankly, because that was not what I did. And I always thought, how does Donna figure that stuff out? And so typically what happens for me is I am one of a team when there is a transaction being undertaken. So there's, typically if there's going to be, some acquisition or a merger or something like that, there is bond counsel and there's financing counsel and there's the transactional lawyer. And then each side has their own group of attorneys to just review the contracts. And then they bring me in and say, here's the section that deals with regulatory approvals, the applications we're going to need, those sorts of things. So I'm typically just one of a team and I've got a box that I'm in of regulatory. And so I do due diligence, but for me, by the time I'm involved, clients typically will say to us, we're going to, do a merger transaction or construct a facility, whatever the transactional issue is. They say that on the front end. I say things like, well, the commission is taking a harder look at this aspect of generation or that transmission. And then they sort of go away and come up with the deal and the documents and use people like what you used to do to figure all that out. And then it comes back to me as, the agreement for the transaction or the piece of the document where they say, we've now decided what we're going to do. Review it and tell us if all of this is sound. Do we need FERC approval? What do we need? And so there's a transactional element for me, but I'm usually just a piece of it. The other place where I have much more involvement with transactional matters are reviewing those applications that I just talked about, because my clients are both utilities on their own and then they're customers of other utilities. And so when there's a transaction filed, for example, if an entity that provides one of my clients transmission files a merger application with the commission, I review that because it's going to affect our rates, terms, and conditions of service, my clients' rates, terms, and conditions. So I get involved in those. And then inevitably, if the deal does not go as both parties hoped and planned, I'm always involved at that part. So they always call you when something doesn't go quite like both sides thought and say, we agreed to this, how do we get out of it? Or someone misrepresented something. And that's where the regulatory comes back in again.
Yeah, I really don't think that it differs that much. I was obviously part of a team. I was not writing the financing documents or writing the mergers. I was that person that was in my little box, but that
Yeah.
little box is pretty important if you're dealing with the financing or merging of energy companies. So it's a really critical role. I think you probably did more bond work than I did because, again, for your types of clients, that's really important. That's where a lot of the financing comes from. Whereas mine tended to come from maybe private equity or other kinds of commercial lenders. So I think there's some differences there, but not so much different in terms of what we actually did. Or what I did and what you do. So I would also like to, let me just remind the students that if you do have any questions, put them into the Q&A chat and we will try to get to those. I also wanted to talk about, right now we're in the midst of Women's History Month, and we're just on the heels of Black History Month. And I was wondering if you'd like to have some comments about the participation of women and of Black women in the energy industry.
Sure. And thank you for raising that. So I will say that I've been at this for over 20 years now, and I've seen the landscape change in some respects and not enough in others. So it used to be that when I walked into a hearing room, there weren't very many women. I had clients who, I worked with a senior partner, and the senior partner was always a male, who were some of the best mentors I had, but always men. And so I got used to being one of the only girls in the room. And that came with certain understandings, I'll say. And so there were times, everybody's had uncomfortable experiences. There were times where I had to laugh at the off-color joke that I thought, well, this is just not appropriate. But, I don't want to not be in the room with the guys who are making the deal, or I wanted to stay on the team doing the litigation. Luckily, I had 3 older brothers, and so that kind of stuff just sort of washed off of me. There are far more women in proceedings now. There are a number of administrative law judges that I appear before at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission who are women. You and I both were presidents of the Energy Bar Association, and so I just see more women involved in energy law. From the racial minority perspective, we have not had the same level of gains. I am a member of a group called the American Association of Blacks in Energy. They have a DC chapter, and I was on the board for that for a number of years. And we used to laugh that we could have our meetings in somebody's car because there were so few of us. But the one thing I say to younger attorneys, particularly those of color or women, don't let bias or your expectation of bias count you out of a great opportunity. So I have had, sort of uncomfortable things happen, but I can't imagine anyone in their entire career who never has an uncomfortable situation. It just happens. People have bias. And my own feeling is, now that I'm an older partner, is that if you are good and effective and easy to work with, nobody cares. It just sort of washes away. You get to a point where people need you. And even if they did have a bias, they get over it. I will tell just one brief anecdote where this was before I'm old enough at this time that we didn't always see each other on the internet. And I had a client who was visibly surprised when he met me for the first time. And he had on the phone with me said something disparaging against African Americans, and I just didn't say a word. And when I met him in person, he turned just beet red. But what that said to me, but he continued working with me. And what that said, I could have said, that's it, I give up, I'm going to walk away. We ended up having a great working relationship. And what I think he took from that was, how dare him have judged, because this lawyer who saved his backside happened to be African American. And I took from that, I was glad that I didn't react as negatively as I justifiably could have, because it was a great opportunity. And that's just, so sometimes these things happen, but you have to decide, I'm not going to let that stop me one bit. And it's a great career. So.
Yeah, I think that bringing that confidence in yourself is so important. Yeah. And, as I used to say, when you're the only woman in the room, everyone will remember who you are. That can both be good and bad. You walk into, they all remember your name.
Yeah, that is, Donna, you hit on a great point, which gets to the networking point. Being one of the few African Americans, literally I walk in and people go, Adrienne? And I'm thinking, it, because there's not a whole lot of us. Yes. And you're right. That's an easy way for me to be remembered, because there's just not a lot.
That's right. So work it. You work with what you have.
That's right.
And I do want to get into the question about, what should students be doing at this point to be able to build that career? Again, with particular emphasis on women and minorities who may not have as many role models, how are you going to build that career?
Sure. So one of the things that I remembered someone, I commented to you about this, Donna. I remember when I was in law school at GW, we had a speaker come and say something, and I never forgot it. But the speaker said, it was on, careers in law or something. And the speaker said, stay in touch with your law school friends or the younger lawyers who you meet along the way, because those will be the future general counsels, people who will send you clients, that sort of thing. And I remember thinking, the dorks I hang out with are never gonna. And sure enough, those same people are the ones who now call me and say, Adrienne, you're a partner in a law firm. Do you have an insurance practice? Do you have? So that's just one. And the point of that is networking. You can always, always, always network. It may feel like, well, I'm not a senior partner, or I'm not a junior associate yet, or I'm not even out of law school yet. You still can network, and you always can network. Every job I have gotten throughout my career has not been because I applied, but because somebody said, hey, Adrienne, would you consider this thing? And it literally is just because, as Donna knows, I'm a bit of a chatty Cathy, but I also build networks in everything. And you can just sort of think of the places where you have people with similar interests and just make yourself available. One very easy way is to become a student member of the Energy Bar Association. And Donna and I both are past presidents, so I'm honor bound to say it's a phenomenal association. However, the Energy Bar is very small and I think highly collegial. We sort of love to help each other out. And so getting involved in the Energy Bar Association as a student is really good experience. It's a great way to network. Coming to some of the meetings or those sorts of things. And those are things that you can do just as you have time, reaching out to lawyers who do what you want to do. We love having someone call us and say, can we have coffee, just so I can learn, just so I can get to know people. And those are sort of low impact ways to get to know. Donna told me the story that I approached you that I didn't even remember, but I was a younger lawyer and I knew who you were. And I said, I've got to know this woman one way or another. I've got to meet her. And so that's the way it works. So networking is key. That's one of the first things I would highly recommend. Were you about to say something, Donna?
I was just going to say, from my side of that story, I was just standing there, and this woman, it was a EBA, Energy Bar Association reception, and this young woman comes up to me and she sticks out her hand and says, "Hi, I'm Adrienne Clair." And she said it with such confidence. I thought, wow, this is somebody I need to know. And she was right. I did need to know her.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And then
In
we
my
can have
own
a friendship.
in my own mind, and I'm ever grateful for that friendship, in my own mind it was for me, I need to know this person. And I'll say this one anecdote that you laughed when I said I used to be really shy, but I would do this thing with myself where I would tell myself, count to 5 and go. Don't overthink it. What if she doesn't want me to bother her? What if she does? And so I literally would say, all right, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going. And I would I don't have to do that anymore because I, talk to everybody, but to get out of my own shell, I would go to a meeting and say, okay, there's the person you said. So do the count to 5 in your head and go in. You just have to get yourself over that and network and get to know people.
Yeah, I just think that is such an important thing. And your point too about, it's your classmates. It isn't like you have to immediately, as a 1L, get to know the general counsel of some big company and that somehow
That's
that's
right.
going to land you business. It's going to grow over time. Do your good work and get to know people, and it comes back to you. But let's go back
Yeah.
to where we were. We were also talking about other things that students should be doing. And actually, we have a question now that very much relates to this. The
Oh,
question
sure.
says, do you have any book or daily news recommendations about careers in energy or law more generally? So books, daily news, other things that students should be doing at this point to prepare for their career.
So I'll tell you the two things that a few things that I keep on my emails. The book thing I'm really gonna have to think about, only because the books I read about energy law are about energy law, not careers in energy law, but literally. So there's a judge named Scott Hempling who's an ALJ at FERC. And he used to do, and he's recently, I think within the last year or so, Judge Hempling was confirmed at FERC. But at any rate, before that, he was an attorney in private practice. I think he taught at Georgetown. We won't hold that against him. But he was really great. He put out he used to do seminars on energy law and those kinds of things. If you did a search for Energy Law 101, it will come up either Scott Hempling, there's a guy named Larry Greenfield who works at FERC, and he does a 101, and his usually comes up. I've done a number of these 101 sessions. So if you did Energy Law 101 as a Google search, something will come up. But On my desktop, every single morning, I subscribe to Manzama, Google Alerts for every single company that I'm interested in, and then certain energy issues I'm interested in. So I go into Google whenever there's a company I'm either representing, want to represent an issue that matters to me. I put in investment tax credits as a Google alert. Every morning, I get a summary of anything that has to do with investment tax credits. And it gives me, within 10 minutes, I can look at it and I can send clients emails and say, did you know this thing happened? The Hill is considering this other thing's going on. So Google Alerts are one. And then Politico. Interestingly enough, I always sort of poo-pooed it and said, oh, they're journalists. They don't know what I do. It's highly specialized. They do a great top of the waves, from my perspective, a great top of the waves on not just domestic, but also international, not just regulatory, but also legislative and policy. And so for me, it's not highly specialized to my practice, which is good because it lets me see these other avenues that are impacting what I do every single day. So I've become one of these people who gets her news on her phone more than reading it in hard print. And those three are three that I use every single day.
That is really great, and I'm getting tips here too. But you hit on something I thought was really important, was you're getting these news things and you're sending them out to clients. You're keeping that communication going. And I don't think any of the people I've talked to have really talked about that, but that constant, get yourself out there. Just remind your clients you're there and you're thinking about them.
Yeah. So I will say this about, I think you have to, and this goes on to, I do talks on how best to build a practice for yourself, because everybody there's this expectation that if you're in a law firm, you need to build a book of business. But I never learned how to do that. And I always thought, well, who's going to teach us how? So the thing that I will say about that, and briefly, is what the usual advice I give is to thine own self be true, which for me means I am not a person who's comfortable walking up to someone and saying, I'm Adrienne Clair, I'm really good at what I do, you should be giving me your business. That just is not, it's just not my personality. What I am good at, though, I had a former colleague who said I'm congenitally helpful. What I am good at doing is sending you things, right? I would just send things. So I'm really good at saying, hey, Donna, I saw this article about GW. You might want to see it. And then a week or two later, I think, ooh, this one says Don Antonazio did a great job. And I may send you an email that says, I don't know if you saw this article that talks about you. But so I keep myself on your mind, and I show you what I know, that by the time GW Law needs somebody with my skill set, you're thinking, that woman who emails me every once in a while, I'm going to call her. I'm really good at that. So that's my own way of keeping myself, both for just networking anyway, but also for clients. I like it that they don't think the meter's always running for me. Their business is my concern. And so I send them things, and I'm not billing them for that. It's to say, I know you care about investment tax credits. I just had a client last week ask me about it, but I know you care about this. So I'm going to, in the morning while I'm drinking my coffee, I'll just shoot off 10 or 15 different emails about things. And I'm in a law firm, so we have a wonderful library and paralegal staff who help me with that kind of stuff. But it's easy to do that. And it usually, the return on that investment is phenomenal, because clients end up saying, I've got an investment tax issue, can you help me? Well, that's because I've been sending you things for the last 2 weeks, telling you these little snippets that I see. So it's a really easy way. It also helps me stay up on the issues, because it's coming to me, and it keeps a dialogue going.
That is really fantastic advice. We do have one question here, which is not actually for you. Someone is asking about a recording. Yes, just to remind everybody, it usually takes us about a week or so to get them up. But if you check out our YouTube channel, GW Environmental Law, I know it says environmental, not energy, but we're all one over here. If you look for that, you'll find all the recordings that we've been doing in this series, and we will be getting them all up eventually. It just, as I said, a little bit of a lag time while we get them edited and placed. I think we're just about out of time. Anything in closing that we've missed that you would like students to know, Adrienne?
Did not miss anything at all. I will say, for however number of students are interested in energy law, it is heartening to just know that it exists. Lean on Donna. She's a phenomenal resource, and nobody ever tells her no. So if you ever need anything, if you need Donna to reach out to somebody, all of us take Donna's call. One of the few calls that we all take. The other thing I will say is, don't be embarrassed or nervous about reaching out to anyone who's doing what you want to do. We've all been there. I still have people who I call that I consider mentors and say, could you help me figure out how to get from where I'm sitting to this other place I want to be? So feel free to use your contacts wisely.
Just checking here. I don't think there's any more questions. So Adrienne, I'm going to thank you so much for your time that you spent with us today. This has just
My
been a delight. Of course, it's just always fun to talk to you anyway. So
My
uh,
pleasure. Yeah, it's great to see you too.
good to see you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye.